Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo. Last week we had finally made it back to Chesapeake Bay and we anchored right next to the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. We get stuck there for 3 or 4 days waiting out some bad weather before we hop into Chesapeake Bay and we make a monster run. We cover the most distance we've ever covered in one day, and we make it all the way up to Mill Creek, where we've been sitting for a week now. We're waiting for a good weather window to get back up to the Solomons, and hopefully we'll be able to leave on Friday to do that. So we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. After spending 9 or 10 days at Atlantic Yacht Basin, it was so nice to be back on the hook again. I just feel much safer being on the hook. I know I'm the opposite of what most people feel, but for me, we spend 99.999% of our time at anchor, and I just feel much safer out there. I always feel nervous at a dock. You know, it's not water typically that makes boats sink. It's solid objects that make boats sink. So if we can limit our proximity to solid objects, to me that's a good thing. So I very much prefer being at anchor, and I was much more calm, I was much less stressed, and of course a lot of that had to do with the whole broken engine starter thing. Now that I knew that was fixed, that's a big relief as well. But just being at anchor is kind of my happy place. So that was a good thing. While we were at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, we did have one day and night of gale force winds. The winds were blowing in the 35 to 40 knot range, which is right around, 45, 50 miles an hour, somewhere in there. So it was really whipping. And there were 6 of us in the anchorage that night, and 5 of us were anchored right tight up against the southeast shore. So the wind was blowing out of the southeast, and this gave us the maximum protection we could get. And there was one boat, inexplicably, that was anchored out in the mouth of the anchorage. And I'm not sure why they were there. Maybe they were having mechanical issues. Maybe they were exclusively under sail power and they couldn't sail back into the anchorage. I'm not sure, but it was really unfortunate because they were dealing with 3-foot waves for the entire day and night, while we were dealing with 3 to 6-inch waves. So I'm not sure why they were there, but it is what it is. After waiting out the rain and high wind at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, it was time to get back on the road, and we had a 1-day window to lay down some serious tracks and make it as far as we possibly could before the next round of bad weather came in. I don't know what is wrong with Chesapeake Bay this spring, but it seems a little bit unruly, the weather, compared to last year's. And I know I have always said that I don't like leaving in the dark, and I really don't. But if there's one spot where you can safely navigate in the dark, it's in the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area. Everything is very clearly lit. There are very few crab or fish traps that you have to worry about. And you can easily travel 1 or 2 hours in the dark, no problem, and not have any issues. Now, if you stuck to the navigation channels, you could navigate the entirety of Chesapeake Bay in the dark and not have any issues, but I bushwhack the entire Chesapeake Bay. It's just shorter if you can travel in straight lines, so that's the way we go. But with bushwhacking does come crab pots and fish traps and stuff you do have to look out for. So at least the initial part of our journey we could cover in the dark and it not be an issue. So we got back on the road because we wanted to achieve a Herculean task. We only had a 1-day window of weather that we felt was acceptable, so we wanted to make it from the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel all the way up to Mill Creek, which is our favorite anchorage in all of Chesapeake Bay. I knew if we could make that in 1 day, we would be able to hunker down there. There was another round of wind and rain coming in. The weather in Chesapeake Bay this spring has seemed a little bit unruly. It's been a little wilder than in previous years. So I've only been doing this for 5 years, so maybe I've been lucky the last few years to have good calm weather, but this year seems a little squirrely. So we wanted to get somewhere safe for the next round of high wind. And to get up to Mill Creek would be covering 55 nautical miles, and for us, we've never ever traveled that far in 1 day, so I knew it was going to be a long task, or a hard task to achieve. We did have places we could ditch on the way. We could always peel off at Deltaville or Antipoison, I think it's called, Antipoison Creek. We could have stopped there as well. So we had places that we could peel off, but we really wanted to make it the entire distance. Now, Traveling up the bay is always a little bit more difficult than traveling down the bay, and that's the way I'd rather have it, because when I'm traveling down the bay in the fall, I would much rather be able to make good time in the fall and fight going north in the spring when the weather's better. So this is it's all good. I actually enjoy the way this works out. It's the optimum of the two options. I would rather fight in the spring than the fall, because, you know, in the fall you just really have to get south fast. And going north up the bay is more difficult. The way the tides work out and the tide cycles, depending upon the moon phase, the current does flow out to the ocean more than it flows up the bay. So the current coming down the bay might be, and the currents here are very gentle comparatively to other parts. Like in Georgia, you can have a 3-knot current. Up here you're talking about 0.3 to 0.6 knots, so they're very gentle currents, but the majority of that current flows out to sea rather than pushing up the bay. Now the current does push up the bay, but the times that it's pushing up the bay are shorter than the times that it's running out to sea, and the current pushing up the bay is more gentle than it is pushing out to sea. And I believe that's just because of the natural flow of the bay. There's a lot of fresh water, there's a lot of big rivers that come into Chesapeake Bay. For instance, the Potomac River, the mouth of the Potomac is 8 to 10 miles wide, so it's a massive river. There's the Pax River, the Piankantank River, and the major source of fresh water, I forget the river, but it's actually way in the northern bay, and that has strong flow to it as well. So most of the flow, or a lot of the flow, is naturally flowing out to sea. So overcoming that, it just, you know, it just takes a little bit. When you head out into Chesapeake Bay, you never know exactly what to expect. And it's good to be prepared for everything. You know, you have your wind projections, you have your wave projections, you have all of this information, and it's usually accurate, but sometimes it's not. You know, you can get caught in a freak storm, you can get caught in a microburst, you can get, you know, the projections can just be flat out wrong. And that's all happened before, and you just have to be ready to deal with that. Now this day it was very pleasant, and when we got out into the bay, it was partly sunny. There were some clouds, but we got to see a little bit of the sunrise. As we proceeded up to the bay, we got to Mobjack Bay, in the Mobjack Bay area, and it was complete cloud cover. Now the wind had picked up a little bit by this point, so we were able to sail up the bay, which was nice. That gave us a real boost. And as we got around the Deltaville area, I think that was around 1 o'clock, the sun came out, the clouds parted, and it got really warm. So then we had to change into our summer attire. So it was a very pleasant day. Now we got lucky that the current was going with us for about half of the day, which is about the best that you can ever wish for when going north in Chesapeake Bay. And we actually got into our anchorage around 5 p.m. We did make it all the way up to Mill Creek. It was just an absolutely wonderful day. The waves were not crazy. And you know, I've come across a new website that I'm using very heavily now, and it's kind of stupid that I didn't go there before, but it's actually the National Weather Service. Who would have thunk it, right? And I use it primarily in Chesapeake Bay for the wave projections. Now, you can look at wave heights, and we're pretty finicky on wave heights. If you're looking for hardcore sailing, this is not the channel for you. We are fair weather travelers. We only go when the conditions are right. You will never ever once catch us beating into the wind. That is just not our jam. We don't do that. So, and we don't have to. We're not in a hurry. We always anchor somewhere safe. So, you know, very rarely do we ever get into a situation where we have to travel in bad weather. Now, that being said, in Chesapeake Bay, we don't like to travel when the waves are going to be above 2 feet. You know, the crew doesn't enjoy it, and when they're nervous, I'm not happy. So we did have a bad experience in our hell ride to Hampton 4 years ago, and that really left a mark on the crew, and I'm not ever going to put them through that again. So we like to go in 1 foot or less waves, and the problem with the waves in Chesapeake Bay, it's not necessarily the height. A 3-foot wave is not, it's not massive. I mean, it's a good sized wave, don't get me wrong, but the period in Chesapeake Bay is what really catches you, because usually the period is very short. It's like a 3-foot wave every 6 or 7 seconds rolling up from behind you can get very uncomfortable very quickly, and it's not any fun. And if we're beating into a 3-foot wave, we're literally moving backwards. We just have no power unless there's a strong wind, and in that case, we probably wouldn't be out there anyway. So we are fair weather travelers. We're not hardcore sailors. We like to live life in the easy lane, and that's where we'll always be. And you know, you can have a 10-foot wave out in the ocean that's rolling up on you every 20 seconds, and it's not bad. You know, it's not necessarily the height of the wave that kills you, it's the period of the wave. How fast are they coming? And that's not to say out in the ocean a 10-foot wave can't hit you every 8 seconds. I'm sure it certainly can. I'm not trying to like compare the two. I'm just saying the thing that really gets you in trouble is when you've got a decent wave height, 2+ feet, and they're hitting you fast. That's when it gets real uncomfortable, and we just, there's no reason for us to do it, so we don't do it. If you're looking for hardcore sailing, I'm sure there's a lot of great channels out there. This is not one of them.
Tried over and over to be happy again, but I can't seem to get over thinking this will never end. Too many beautiful nights I spend my time alone. Can't seem to have an appetite for getting up out the door. But I'll get my shit together one of these days, and I'll start to feel better. Maybe I can change, and I'll realize it's not so bad once I get out of my head. I'll get my shit together one of these days. I've tried every morning to wake up an optimist, but all I can do today is just try to exist. Too many years gone to waste on what was never me, waiting for things to change, never knowing what I need. But I'll get my shit together one of these days, and I'll start to feel better. Maybe I can change, it's not so bad once I get out of my head. I'll get my shit together one of these days. And I'll find a way to be okay when the world falls down on me. I'm gonna leave this place for another state where I can finally be free. I gotta believe that I'll get my shit together one of these days, and I'll start to feel better, and I'll realize it's not so bad once I get out of my head. I'll get my shit together one of these days. Yeah, one of these days. I'm gonna get my shit together.
And that's all we have time for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't make these videos. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotton, Peter Allen, and Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. Your support really means the world to me. I do have one legacy patron member, and her name is Joan Linbo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of extra videos and photos of our travels, and I try and keep everything there up to date and post at least once or twice a week, so it gives you a little peek behind the curtain. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That'll help us out more than you'll ever know, and that actually doesn't cost you anything, so hit that like button. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.